Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. And today I've got a Kizer, and it is a Kizer that is wildly, wildly popular. There are so many of these out there that it's almost overwhelming, but this one has to be one of the most impressive. This, of course, unless you've been living under a rock, you know, is the Kizer Militaw. These are so prolific and so well loved, and for good reason. This knife is almost perfect. I mean, I have really no complaints about it other than maybe it's not suited for every role. But if you have like more than one knife, one of them should probably be a Kizer Militaw, because even though I'm not a big gentleman's folder type of guy, this is just an absolute complete home run. This is a beautiful knife, perfectly executed by Kizer, and a gorgeous design from Jonathan Stiles, who happens to be Canadian. Thinking of Canada, we recently got a new prime minister, which is the same as the old prime minister. So I feel bad for Jonathan that he's stuck dealing with the horrible policies of our current government. Nonetheless, Jonathan says this knife was inspired by a hummingbird. And I don't know what the hummingbird said to Jonathan, but that hummingbird was a genius, because this knife is so good. All right. So let me give a quick rundown on the specs, and then we'll get into the particulars of the knife. So it's 8 inches overall, which is really nice for an EDC knife. It's 3 3/8 inches on the blade, 3 3/4 inches of grip area, and that's using this. I guess you can choke up here if you were doing finer work. Now you have to be careful because there's nothing stopping you from slipping up onto the blade, but from here you've got this very deep choil, and the knife feels really, really nice. So 3 3/4 inches grip area to here. All right. 3 7/16 inches on the cutting edge. So almost 3.5 inches of cutting edge on this 3 3/8 inch blade, which is pretty nice. And finally, this is going to be 4 5/8 inches closed. So not too big at all. In fact, a pretty nice size for a carry. Weighs in for that size at 4 ounces, which is not what I would call lightweight, but is certainly more than acceptable for a knife of this size and in these materials. And those materials are S35VN titanium and this gorgeous purple fat carbon. We'll work our way through some of these as we go along, but first of all, let's take a look at this blade. It's a fingerprint magnet, so I've wiped it off a couple of times, and I got a cloth right here because I'm probably, see, I already got a little bit of a fingerprint on it, just showing it to you. This is absolutely gorgeous. This polished DLC that Kizer is doing, they've done it on a bunch of models in the last little while, is completely fantastic. It is just so good. And the knives that have it look amazing. And so I've got to, so there are, by the way, other versions of the Militaw, but one of the reasons that I said this has got to be the best one is it's just so great looking with that fantastic blade finish. All right, the blade is fairly thin stock, which is perfectly fine for a gentleman's folder. It's got a decent amount of cutting edge. It's fairly thin behind the edge, and so in that, slices pretty nicely. Now, is it the best slicer I've ever felt? No, I've got some hollow grinds that are a little more aggressive, but you've got a full flat grind in thin blade stock that's thin behind the edge. It cuts really well. Like, very little effort is required for this to cut. And so, yeah, really nice slicing knife here. No question about it. All right, so moving on to S35VN, by the way, is the steel. So, kind of a very good, well-balanced steel, right? Very corrosion resistant, great edge holding capability. It's not gonna It's not going to chip or be too brittle. It's a really nicely balanced steel. Not the best super steel out there, but very, very good, very respectable steel. Let's move on to the next thing that is highly, highly notable about this knife, and that is the action. So we've got a bolster lock style knife, if we call it that. You notice that the onlays are sort of kind of onlay-ish instead of, your typical full bolster construction. But the action on this is absolutely superb, right? It's about as superb as Joe's management style. And if you know what I'm talking about, you know. If not, you'll just have to take my word for it that it is a great action. Everything feels exactly the way you would want it to feel. The Spidey flick is great. You can do a nice little thumb roll there if you need to take it out slowly. The front flipper works great, very satisfying. And I'm not, a big front flipper guy, but this one really, really works. Totally drop shut, as you can see. Now you do have to be a little bit careful because when you're closing this, now my pattern, here's how I almost always close every knife. That's not it. I open the lock and use my finger to kind of bring it to where I want, and then I just turn it around and do this. All right. If you let this fall on your thumb, you can see the blade can hit your thumb. So be aware of that. Now, to me, that's not really like a big issue, right? It's just you've got to get used to that knife, and if you just fold it while leaving your thumb in the way, it's going to hit. All right. But the deployment on this is so satisfying. I mean, it is one of the most addictive knives I've ever felt. If you have this in your hand, you just have to pick it up and flick it a few times. And then a few becomes, 10 or 15 or 20, or you just end up opening and closing it and being completely lost in your thoughts for, the next half hour. It is so good, guys. The action on this is essentially perfection. All right. The lock bar is very accessible. The tension is perfectly set so that when I go to unlock this knife, it's just natural, right? Nothing is in the way. I don't have to push too hard. It is completely ideal. What we would wish all knives of this style could have. All right. So the action on this knife, lockup, deployment, just a total absolute home run. Okay. And then of course we have the gorgeous purple fat carbon, which looks amazing. Milled titanium clip. Now this is not a lefty friendly knife. But I mean, they've made so many of these. I would not be surprised if there are left-handed versions out there. And I have to say, sometimes if you're really going for a look, all right, and that look demands that the show side be clean, I get not putting a left-handed clip on there. I'm sorry, lefties, but that's part of the deal when you're a minority of the population. Now, I think there are lefty versions out there of this, so that would be the one to buy if you're left-handed. And in that case, it'll look just as good as this, only backwards. Okay. And so, yeah, great knife, but the clip is not movable, and the lock bar wouldn't be movable anyway. All right, really, really interesting how they've done these sort of 4 screws. That was part of the thought process on the design. And some of the models that aren't, so I'm going to say this is the higher end titanium version. I know not all of them are going to have this colorway. There are plain tie with various different inlays with different blade finishes on them. And I'm fairly confident in saying that all of the titanium versions are going to be absolutely phenomenal. Having never handled the budget version with which is a liner lock, I'm supposing, I can't speak to how good that is, but the titanium version is a pleasure. All right. And the next thing that I have to say about this, like this just keeps on, nailing it. And so the next area that this knife does really, really well is ergonomics. when you grip this in your hand, your finger lands in this front choil, everything is smooth, everything is contoured. It feels so good in a saber grip. Now, in a hammer grip, it's not quite as good. You can kind of improve the hammer grip by choking up a little bit, although you do run the risk of running up onto the blade there if you're not careful. But in a saber grip, this feels like it is meant to be in a human hand. And maybe there was even, R&D that was done to make sure it felt that good, but it is really, really good. It feels great in hand. And for a smaller, lighter knife, that isn't always the case. Oftentimes, the first thing to go when you try to sort of minimize a knife down is the feel in hand, but not so with this knife. All right, what about comparisons? Well, first of all, I don't have that many comparisons. I will say I've got one other Kizer here, which is not a comparison by any means, but the design is so good that I think it's worth just pointing out that Kizer has really been kind of killing it lately. I do have a pretty nice concept knife here. This is the Pretatout. Very, very different, designed for a rather different purpose, but similar size, similar weight, titanium frame lock, even similar action, although this action is not as good as this. Something like the Civivi Vision FG is a great comparison, similar, in terms of action and feel in hand and, being a great gentleman's type folder, really, really good. Either one of these, if you want something a little lighter for light duty EDC to carry to church or something like that, you can't go wrong with either one of these. What else do I have? I mean, this is not a competitor at all. Again, we're in a completely different price bracket now, but Chris Reeve Knives in Cosi is kind of in that similar wheelhouse, although much, much harder use. All right. So there are just a few, comparisons. Although, and again, I have to say this, in my collection, I don't really emphasize sort of lightweight EDC gentleman's folder type of knife. So I don't have a lot of stuff to share, but this is phenomenal. You know what it puts me in mind of actually in terms of the quality and the cool factor that it brings? This really puts me in mind of a number of the Brian Nadeau Riot collabs. There are a number of them out there. They're all gorgeous. They're all great, sort of lighter weight, gorgeous, well-made EDCs, well thought out. And this, I think, kind of fits in that category pretty well. All right. Thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And again, this knife is an absolute home run. And so if you don't have one of these, it's definitely worth picking one up if you can find one on the secondary. Now, my suggestion to be safe is that you go to the higher end version, which is still like $200. So it's not overly expensive. I think this one gets close to $300, but worth every penny. This is a show-stopping knife. Absolutely gorgeous. Really nails everything exactly the way it should be. So kudos to Kizer. Thanks a lot to Bradley for lending this over to me so I could check it out for a little while and share it with you guys. Absolutely love this knife, and I'm going to be sorry to return it to the lender. All right, talk to you later.